All right. Okay, subroutines are very, very important because this is the way to break up your program into smaller components, okay, and keep everything manageable. So this is a very important topic. Let's go over the basic concepts. I'll just look at this list here and just kind of mention the things that we have already talked about, and you guys can ask questions if you have any. On next Tuesday, I think we are ready for a practice exam, and then 1 week after the practice exam is our second exam. Okay? So the actual exam is going to be, let's see, next Tuesday is...
It'll be the 23rd.
23rd, so it'll be the 30th when we have our second exam?
No, I think the 23rd is the
23rd?
second
Okay.
second exam.
So let's go ahead and set that date. I'll set the date in Moodle so that as a reminder. So go to new event, and this will be a course light event. So we'll say exam 2 on the 23rd. Yep, that would be the 23rd. And the time will be exactly this time, so that would be the correct time. The duration is 80 minutes. Kind of like exam 1, except the content will be different. And there's no repetition, same changes. So this way we just know that when you go to the class, when you look up upcoming events, you'll be reminded that we have exam 2 on the 23rd of April. The scope of that exam will be from everything since the first exam, that is not included in the first exam, up to subroutines will be in the scope of the second exam. So arrays will be in the second exam, subroutines is going to be in the second exam. Now subroutine is a big topic because it includes all sorts of stuff. It includes, let me just go back and take a second look at the concepts that we have already talked about regarding subroutines. When you look at subroutines, I would use the updated subroutine notes because it's just a better presentation of the same material. Section 3 talks about subroutine invocation and returning. That has to do with the return line number. We are basically dynamically allocating and deallocating columns in order to track when I'm done with a subroutine, where am I going to go to continue execution. That's what section 3 is about. Section 4 talks about local variables. Basically, a local variable is local in two senses, in two ways. One, it is local in scope, which means a local variable is visible only within the subroutine that you define the local variable. Nowhere else in your program can access that particular name. But it is also local in the sense of its duration or lifespan. In other words, a local variable is created along with the return line number, and it is also deallocated along with the return line number. It is on a per invocation basis, not on a per subroutine basis. In other words, if you have 20 subroutines and 400 local variables, if none of the subroutine is invoked, then no space will be consumed by local variables. On the other, you can also have one single subroutine like factorial. It's one single subroutine, but depending on how many times you do the recursion, each invocation has its own local variables. So it is local in the sense of on a per invocation basis. After section 5, we talked about by value parameters, which are basically like local variables with one important difference. The difference between a by value parameter and a local variable is a local variable always starts with an unknown value. We don't know what it is. It has a value, but we don't know what it is. With a by value parameter, the initial value is specified by the invoke statement. So the subroutine itself does not determine the initial value of a by value parameter. It is whoever is invoking the subroutine that determines the initial value of a by value parameter. Then we talk about by reference parameters because with by value parameters you have a way to input something into a subroutine. In other words, there's a way to pass information into a subroutine, but there's no way to pass information out of a subroutine other than using global variables. A by reference parameter is basically a way so that a subroutine can access something that is outside of the subroutine. It is a reference to another column. And that's section 6. And then after section 6, we talk about returning a value, which basically means the invocation of a subroutine can take the place of whatever value type, or whatever that return value type can be at. So if you're returning a number, the entire invocation can be inside a multiplication, can be on the left hand side or the right hand side of a multiplication or comparison. Any place where you can expect a number, you can also expect an invocation of a subroutine that returns a number. Okay. So we'll go ahead, with that note, we'll go ahead and talk about, but what if the return value is not a number? What if it is just true false? Where can we go in this case? I mean, where can it be? Where can we put that invocation? So that's what we'll do today first, and then if there are no questions about subroutines, then we can move on to the next topic. Are there any questions looking at just the outline of what we have been talking about for the past few weeks regarding subroutines? Are there any questions? Yep.
I have one just related to subroutines and the exam. Will it be set up the same way as the first generally, where you'll do some of it and we'll just have to fill in the portions as far as the subroutines, or will we be doing the entire thing?
You'll be doing the entire thing, because if I did a portion of that, that really kind of gives away how to do it.
And as far as arrays, will it be set up the same way? Will we do the entire thing? And as far
Right.
as
I will make the traces short enough that it is practical to do it in an exam, but unfortunately I cannot just give a partial trace first, because the partial trace, the first part of the trace, will kind of give away of how to do it. Yep.
Any chance you can, or are the practice exams already uploaded?
The practice exams, I think some of those are already uploaded. If you see a link to it, it's already up there.
All right.
So these are already up there, and so are these two. These are all documents. I think this is a compressed file, and these two they look like spreadsheets to me.
All right.
Yep. And you can also, this is the actual exam from last year. So there are several exams that we can look into. Right, so let's go ahead and start with a trace, of a kind of more interesting use of an algorithm like this. So we'll go ahead and we'll combine this with arrays. Okay, so we'll make an interesting combination of things that we already know, but not really the combination of the two. A subroutine. I'll just call this XYZ, so I'm not going to disclose what it will do first. Okay. And this time we'll have a passing by reference, and we'll have array A as a pass by reference thing. So I'll just call it A, but when we specify what we are passing a reference to, then we'll be clear what it is. And then pass by value B. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll say if, we need I2, so pass by value I. There we go. So we'll say if I is less than bar A bar, then we'll do something here. What we'll do is we'll say return A bracket I equals B, or invoke XYZ. A is used to specify A, B specifies B, but I plus 1 specifies I. Put some extra parentheses here. Oh, by the way, how's the homework assignment going? Have you guys started with the homework assignment or not?
Yeah.
You should get started with that one, because the return a value concept is really kind of important, but this will help too. And then the else is return false. And if, and define sub. All right, fix on the indentation first. Okay. And then we'll have main, because we are switching to this, kind of more. This standard is closer to what C does. everything. So we have a main subroutine, and inside we have a local variable. We call it A, but we'll just be clear that A is an array, okay, of, we'll just make it 3 integers, okay. And then we'll say A bracket 0, initialization, doesn't really matter. A bracket 1 is 3, A bracket 2 is 7. And then we'll just say print invoke XYZ. We use A to specify parameter A. And then we use, let's see, we look for 3 to specify parameter B. And then 0 to specify parameter I. Define sub, domain. That's my entire program. So I think this is a really good program to look at for many, many different reasons. It's a combination of many things that we have talked about in the past, but in a kind of weird and strange combination of those things. Okay, we talked about arrays, right? We talked about how to search in an array, and we have arrays here. Okay, A in main is an array of 3 integers. So you can see from the initialization that A is an array. But we are combining the concept of array with passing by reference. We are passing array A by reference to subroutine XYZ. So that's a kind of interesting combination. And 2, okay, let me change the program just a little bit. I'm sorry for people who are just writing it. I'm going to change this a little bit because I want to make another kind of strange combination of things that we already know, but it's the combination that makes it kind of interesting. So we'll say if invoke XYZ A specifies A, 3 specifies B, 0 specifies I, then print yay. I don't want to say the actual message, because otherwise, it just gives the whole thing away. So I want you guys to kind of try to figure out what this is actually doing as we deal with it, okay? And this one's just go dope. Dope. Is it D-U-H?
D-O-H or something.
Dope. Yeah. It's
That's all the
interesting.
recording is going to be, is just everybody going dope for 10 seconds.
Then that word loses its meaning. Because it's not the right context to use that word. Okay. So I'm sorry that I changed the program midstream, because I think this is another interesting combination of things that we talked about, right? We talked about invoking a subroutine, no problem. We talked about how to return a value from a subroutine, no problem. We talked about conditional statements, no problem. But we're combining all of those things on line 16. Okay? So it's a combination of things that we have already talked about. The question is, how do we apply all of these things at the same time? Okay. We talked about passing by reference. We talked about passing by value. So those things are here. The only thing, well, I guess we do have local variables too. So this really covers just about everything that we have talked about, except for loops. Okay, we don't have a loop here, but actually we do. It just doesn't look like a loop at this point. We do have recursion, because when you look at subroutine XYZ, it can potentially invoke itself. Okay, so that's interesting. All right. Are there any questions at this point, just looking at the code? Yep.
So what's your logic behind for your return value on 6? Why do you have this junction there? What would be the logic for that? Why would you do that?
Well, that's something that we'll work out.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I told you here, then it would just be giving away the meaning of the algorithm. So we want to try to figure out what it's actually doing as we go through the trace. Okay, that's one good thing about tracing is I can talk about it as we go, and then you will start to realize what this is actually doing. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started with this one. And the trace is going to be kind of difficult to write, because it's going to have it's going to be really wide. let me create the folder first to save it. So today is 0411. And we'll call that. I cannot name it the way I want it because that name would kind of give away what the algorithm is really going to do. So I'll just call it XYZ. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and trace it. And the trace is going to be quite useful because it illustrates multiple concepts all at the same time. And also the combinations. Okay, so I can display this much first, okay? And in sheet 2, we have conditions to evaluate, so we have comments, and then we have line number. There are no global variables, so the preconditions are pretty easy to state. Nothing to really say. On line 22, we're invoking main from outside of the subroutines. So we need a return line number, and that's just post. But we also have to allocate for all the local variables of main. Okay, we have local variable A. But from the description of local variable A on line 12 of the algorithm, we know it is not a single thing, it is an array of 3 integers. So the way we do it as a local variable is pretty much the same way as before. We allocate 3 columns for A, 1 column for each element. So we have A bracket 0 being unknown because it's a local variable. This one is unknown, that one is unknown as well. And that's how we set up the columns. So A, technically speaking, is columns D, E, and F together because each column is only one element of the array. When you talk about the array itself, it is occupying 3 columns. Are we doing okay so far? Because right here we are seeing a combination of the local variable concept combined with the concept of arrays. But that's okay, right? Because we are just changing the way we allocate the columns for the array. It's not allocated from the very beginning, it is allocated when the subroutine is invoked. Are we still doing okay so far? Okay. So now we go into the subroutine, starting on line 13. Line 13 is not really that big of a deal. We kind of know this already. It's just accessing individual elements in an array. In this case, it's really well spelled out. A bracket 0 gets 5. And then on line 14, A bracket 1 gets 3. And then on line 15, A bracket 2 gets 7. Okay, so these 3 lines should not be very surprising at all because it's just initializing an array. Line 16 is kind of interesting. So let's go to line 16 and try to figure out what line 16 is really trying to do. Okay, the outermost portion of line 16 is that it is a conditional statement. In other words, we are going to ask a question. Depending on the answer to that question, either true or false, we'll decide whether to go to line 17 or line 19. Okay, that's basically the behavior of a conditional statement. Conditional statement. But how do I decide which way to go? So it looks like we're using the return value of XYZ to help us determine which way to go. So that means I'm not quite ready to make that decision of whether I should go to line 17 or go to line 19 at this point because I have to invoke the subroutine first. Okay? Is that making any sense? So we are now combining the concept of returning a value with the concept of a conditional statement. Because nobody says that the return value of a subroutine only can go to an expression. I can utilize it right away. As long as it's returning either true or false, I can use that to help me decide which way to go in a conditional statement. Or if I have a loop, I can use that too. Yep.
So this condition is invoking XYZ and checking if XYZ is whatever.
It's invoking XYZ. XYZ, when it returns back to line 16, will give us an answer of either true or false, and then based on that value, we'll go to line 17 or line 19. Yep, go ahead.
And the true or false, is that within the XYZ or is that within line 16? So if 3 gets V, or V gets 3 and then I gets not, then it's true, or hang up in, was that line?
We'll see soon enough.
Okay.
But that's a good question to keep in mind, as we go through the trace. Very good. Good questions. Yep.
If XYZ returns anything other than 0, we can say it's true, right?
In this class, we have actual true and false, so it has to return either true or false. Cannot return anything other than true or false. But in a C program, yes, anything other than 0 is considered true. Yeah. But in this class, we don't kind of get into that confusing, really. Okay. All right. So let's get back into our trace. So on line 16, we kind of agree that yes, we have to invoke the subroutine to figure out what we should do with the conditional statement. Now this time we're invoking XYZ, and you can see that XYZ has returns, so we have to set up a return info instead of a return line number. Now this part is really important because I looked at some of the questions that I got for the current homework assignment. The return info is essentially the same as the line that has the invocation, except the invocation that you're dealing with is replaced by a single question mark. Okay, so in this case, the return info has to clearly state that it is on line 16, that we have a conditional statement. And so the entire syntax or the entire line of line 16 has to be here, except the invocation, invoke XYZ, blah, blah, blah. That part is replaced by a single question mark because we are using a question mark to represent a placeholder and just say, oh, subroutine XYZ, when you are ready to specify the return value, put it here, where the question mark is. So are we still doing okay so far with setting up the return info of XYZ on line 16? Okay. Now, in order to invoke subroutine XYZ, we need to give it some extra information to process. Okay, so we have parameter A, parameter B, and also parameter I. Parameter I is easy. It is just 0 because it's, if you look at line 16, which is where we are invoking, 0 goes to I, 3 goes to V. So those two are pretty easy to deal with because they're really just constant values. Okay, so that's easy to deal with. What about A here? Okay, according to the invocation, we use A to specify A, which at first may seem kind of confusing. So we have to first figure out which A are we talking about. The A on the left-hand side is the A that is already known to the main subroutine. The A on the left, excuse me, I take it back. The A on the left-hand side is the A that we already know, which is columns D, E, and F. The A on the right-hand side is parameter A passing by reference of XYZ. So now the question is really boiling down to how do we pass an array by reference? Well, go ahead.
Just like say column DEF.
AKA. Yep, it is an alias. So A, oops, not here, here. A is also known as columns, in this case D to F. Exactly. So it's a single reference, but it does refer to 3 different things. It's basically telling me how to get to 3 different things. Okay? Now this is really a deviation from how C actually get things done, but we'll kind of keep it this way because it really is the better way of doing things. C has a lot of features that are not so good, and not so ideal. So this is the idealized, case of passing something by reference, passing an array by reference. Okay. All right. So now that we have set up everything with the parameters of XYZ as well as its return info, we can go into XYZ and start execution in XYZ. The first line that does anything useful inside that subroutine is line 5, and it starts with asking a question. Is I less than bar a bar? And the answer is true because in this case I is 0 and A is also known as columns D to F, and when you look at columns D to F, what is the number of elements of that array occupying columns D, E, and F? How many elements do we have? 3 elements. So 0 is less than 3 is true. Okay, so no problem with this. If the condition is true, we move on to line 6. Line 6 is kind of the same thing, okay? But since this is a disjunction, and we already talked about short-circuited evaluation of disjunction, we have to evaluate this. We don't have a choice. We have to evaluate from left to right. Okay, so we first have to evaluate A bracket I equals V. Let's switch back to the trace here. Okay, A bracket I is 0, so A bracket I refers to A bracket 0. But this A is also known as column D to column F, so you go to column D to F. The first element of that particular array has a value of 5. V has a value of 3. 5 equals to 3 is false. Okay, very good. So that means, can I make a conclusion about the disjunction even with short-circuited evaluation? No, because if the first value is false, I'm forced to evaluate the condition on the expression to the right-hand side. So that means when we look at line 6, we have to make another invocation, because right now I cannot determine the actual result of the disjunction without the invocation of XYZ again. So I have to say, okay, I got to evaluate the invocation too. So now we have to set up everything. It gets difficult because I can't see all the columns at the same time. So I'm going to do this trick here of splitting the screen horizontally, and so we can kind of at least focus on the new columns that we're creating. Sorry?
That's vertical, not horizontal.
We are splitting it. Oh, we're splitting it vertically by having two. Okay. We're splitting it. No, we're splitting it horizontally, so that we end up with two things, arranged in a horizontal way.
Okay.
Right? Okay, we're splitting it so that the scrolling, only affects the rows. Okay, doesn't affect the columns. Okay, so we can look at different columns at the same time. How about that? Is that a better way to put it? Okay. All right. So we have to set up the return info. We have to set up A, V, and I. So all of those things have to be set up. But my main concern right now is how do we set up the return info on line 6? Well, you just have to look at line 6 and say, I'm going to copy everything except for the invocation itself. That will be replaced by a single question mark. Okay, so that's what we'll do. So in this case, we actually have a choice because we are forced to evaluate the left-hand side first. So you can, if you want to, say it is actually false already. So you can say false or the invocation itself, which is also replaced by a single question mark. I should say return to, because the action is return. Okay, so there we go. So I'm hoping that this will help you do your homework, because your homework has returns as well. So what you need to do is to indicate the line number and then copy the entire line where the invocation is, but replace the invocation with a single question mark. So that's what you need to do with your homework assignment, which I think you have an assignment statement instead of a return statement. All right, is that okay so far? Okay, next is parameter A. Parameter A is still pretty much a reference to the same places. So A is also known as columns D to F, D, E, F, just like that. V is the same by passing V to V, so V is still 3. And I is 1 more than what it was before, so I would go from 0 to 1. All right, let me just scroll everything to the right place. Yep.
And because V is a by-value parameter, it's not an AKA to the previous V column?
That is correct, because V is passed by value.
Okay, so
Yeah, passing it by reference does not really help me in this case, so I'll just pass it by value. Yep.
Seems like a linear search.
Yes, it is. It's a linear search done by recursion. Yep.
Looks a lot bigger than the binary search.
It's bigger only because of a lot of parameters and stuff like that. The actual core logic is still pretty simple. All right, so once we set this up, we can continue execution at the beginning of the subroutine again, which is on line 5. Line 5 first asks, okay, is I less than bar A bar? Yep, that is still true. And I somehow have an extra close parenthesis there to get rid of it. And then we still have to go to line 6, right? On line 6, it tells me that we want to return the disjunction of A bracket I equals V or an invocation of XYZ itself. This time you have to be careful because when we evaluate line 6 right now, A is also known as column D to column F, so we look up column D, E, F, and we want to access, A bracket 1, which has a value of 3. And then going back to these columns, V has a value of 3 as well. So that means A bracket I equals V is true, okay. And do we have to evaluate the other side once we understand short-circuited evaluation? No. So we can just say, oh, okay, so line 6 is really just saying return true. Okay. Knowing that we are now executing return true, what do we do? With any type of return statement when you execute it, you look up the rightmost return info column, return info, and the objective is to fill that question mark in with the value that we are returning. But in this class, we kind of have to go through all this trouble of copying and pasting, because we just want to specify the return value. And then someone can say, oh, okay, return false or true. The whole thing is true. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and re-specify that as return true. No, we don't do that. Okay, because the execution of a return statement is just to replace the question mark and nothing else. That's all it's going to do. And that's exactly what we did here. We just replaced the question mark with a true because we know the left-hand side of the disjunction, which is A bracket I equals V, is true already. And since we are also using short-circuited evaluation, that means we don't have to invoke the subroutine again. Okay? And this stops the recursion right here, okay? Because we are not invoking, we don't have to evaluate the right-hand side of the disjunction. So line 6 is done. Okay, we are not invoking anything. We are done with this line 6 with this invocation. After line 6, we get out of the conditional statement, and then we end up on line 10. Line 10 is the end of the subroutine. It has two things to do. The first thing it has to do is to look up the return info cell and say, okay, where am I supposed to go back to? And when I get back to line 6, what else do I have to do on line 6? That's what it needs to do. That's the first thing. So in the convention, or the new convention, we'll just copy and paste the entire thing so that we know what we're supposed to do on line 6. And then the second thing you have to do at the end of a subroutine is to deallocate everything that you allocated for that invocation. So you just go to the entire invocation and cross out every single column to say that, okay, columns K, L, M, and N are now deallocated. And then after those two things you do at the end of a subroutine, you go back to the previous invocation so we can continue to execute this part of the program. So it does get a little bit messy because I'm running out of space. All right, so now we are going to execute line 6. Line 6 is now as described on row 7 in the trace, which is just return false or true. We are evaluating the return statement right now. Okay, what is false or true? It's true, so the whole thing becomes return true. Now how do I return true? When you execute a return statement, you look up the return info cell, and then you copy and paste it, and just change the question mark to whatever you're returning. In this case, we're returning a value of true. It is not right to write down your return. It's not okay to replace the question mark with false or true. You actually have to evaluate the expression false or true, come up with a single value, and then update the question mark with that result of the expression. Okay, is that okay so far? Because I'm just kind of spelling out all the common mistakes from previous semesters so that you guys can kind of avoid it and also make it, I just want to clarify. So are we doing okay so far with this trace? This cell is the action which causes this to happen. It causes an update of the return info cell. Are we doing okay so far? Once again, we're done with line 6, and then we just move on to line 10. Once again, line 10 is the end of the subroutine. We do the usual thing. We say, oh, okay, we look up the return info cell. This is where we are returning to, and that's what is left on that line to perform. And then we say, oh, okay, once we make use of that result, these columns do not serve me any purpose anymore. Let's go ahead and deallocate all of these columns so they become available again. And then we can continue execution now on line 16. Oops, I think I copied the wrong one, didn't I?
It's always the bottom one, right, that we want to.
Yeah, always the bottom one, the one that is fully resolved.
Fully resolved.
Yeah. Okay, so now we are continuing execution on line 16, but line 16 now looks like this, okay? It's no longer what it is specified in the algorithm because we have just invoked and returned from the subroutine with an answer, okay? So what do we do with this, if true then something? Well, we still have to evaluate what is the expression itself, but this one is kind of trivial because all you have to say is to say true is true. Whenever you make the decision to decide which way to go with a conditional statement, you still have to tell me whether the expression is true or false, right? But this one is trivial because it's saying, line 16 is saying if true, so true is true, and that tells me which way should I go on line 16. We go to line 17 because the condition is true. We go to the then branch onto line 17. When you execute line 17, it just prints yay to the screen or dialog box or whatever you want to generate the output. And then that's the end of the conditional statement. So after that, we get out of the conditional statement. We end up on line 21. Line 21, oh, I got to scroll the other side too. Because we are now back to this portion. Line 21 is the end of the main subroutine. It will have to look up the return line number. The return line number tells me I have to go back to post. But once I look up the return line number, I have no use of these 4 columns anymore. So I will do the same thing. You just kind of copy and paste it. And then mark both as deallocated. There are actually 4 columns being deallocated, but it looks like 2 because A is merging 3 columns into 1. And then after that, we continue execution at post. There's nothing else to do. We're done. Yep.
So if you wanted the program to tell you which element in the array was the value, then you would just change the by val I to maybe a by reference I, so you can bring it back out, and then you would print
Yes,
I.
you can do it that way. You can pass I by value by reference, but that also means in main you need to allocate one integer or a local variable
Y.
to store that value. Right. Yeah, you can do it that way. Yeah. All right. So, do we have any questions about this particular program? Because it's really a showcase of combining different concepts, but each concept is still really applied the same way as we always do.
Will you post this one to the D2L?
You mean Moodle?
Sorry. All of the classes.
Since I'm in class, it's actually better for me to post that one single file, one file at a time. So I can do that.
Is there gonna be a question like that on the test? That in depth with everything combined on the test? Not in depth, but.
I think there'll be a combination, but not. I would try not to make it very tricky. Yeah. But it will definitely be things that we talked about already in class. When you look at each individual one, it's just how do we combine all those concepts. The really tricky one about this is passing by reference. How do we pass an array by reference? And that really is the tricky one. But other than that, the other combinations are fairly. It's just a new way of looking at things. It's like, okay, I know how to do exactly this one, but how do we do it when it's combined with the other concept? It's still mostly determined by the sequence of events. What do we need to do on this line? Okay, let me just switch back for a moment so I can focus on that discussion. So when you look at line 16, you can basically say, oh, this is a combination of a conditional statement with an invocation of a subroutine that returns a value. Okay, so that's how you look at it. But when you look at the sequence of things or sequence of events that you need to do, then the fact that this invocation is inside the condition of a conditional statement is not relevant until you actually have the result of the invocation. So when you look at it that way, what you need to do is completely determined by what do you need to do first. Okay. Yep.
And notes will be open, or exam will be open notes?
It's open book, open notes, same as exam 1, where you can bring in anything that is handwritten or printed prior to the test. So all of these test programs, if you want me, I can combine all of these, past, stuff into one single file and just, put it onto the web. So basically it will decompress into individual folders, and each individual folder will be what we do on a particular day, and then you can just, print it out if you want to, or, just study it. I would not bring in too many, a big pile of paper, because the more stuff you bring in, the harder it is to find what you are looking for. Okay, so you kind of have to keep that in mind too. But what you want to do, is entirely up to you. There's no page limitation of how big of a pile you can bring in. Yep.
You're not going to put something just like that sort of complicated on our exam, are you?
I cannot comment on the level of complexity or difficulty, because over the years I learned that my gauge is different.
That would be yes.
Hmm?
That would be yes.
The answer is I do not know how difficult it will be perceived by, somebody else.
The official answer is no comment.
Yes.
The unofficial answer is be afraid.
Well, be prepared. Yeah. Yeah. That the Lion King just popped up in my mind. Yeah. I hate it when this happens. When I encounter phrases, my mind just kind of pops up. Stuff just pops up in my mind. Yet last night, this is obviously a digression. Yet last night, one of my students, I had my lecture in room 129, and the lab is in room 125. So some students will go ahead of me, waiting, at room 125 when I'm, finishing up everything in 129. So, I looked down the hallway and I just say, I'll be there, and then Michael Jackson just popped up in my mind. The child, Michael Jackson, just popped up in my mind. I'll be there, right? That's the song. It just kind of popped up in my mind. I'm like, no, go away. That's how the human brain works, and it's all based on connections, right? It's all connections.
So you see Tab walking down the hallway doing one of these things. Absolutely nothing.
I'll be the geek version of Ali McBeal.
Yeah.
The male version.
The male version. The interesting about the actress is most of the time, on screen and off screen, most people are completely different. Okay, maybe on screen they play something that's totally serious or playboy, and then off screen they're usually the opposite of what you expect. But with this particular actress, what is her name? Hollister. Yeah. I think I only saw or watched one interview with her off screen. She's exactly the same. Her demeanor, the way she talks, everything's like, oh, but that's just like Ellie McBeal. Which is really weird.
Which is why she hasn't done anything since then.
Shots fired.
Yep. Limiting the role to only one. Okay.
You should go watch this video.
Yeah.
Posting that file.
Yep, I'm going to post that file, and Moodle has a pretty cool feature to do that too. So I go to Moodle.
YouTube videos cut down to 14.
Publicist will be calling in a minute.
Huh?
Publicist will be
Yeah.
calling in a minute.
I did it, and it's like, I don't think I've ever seen that show.
I just remember that baby.
Oh yeah.
The chocolate baby.
Yeah.
I don't even know like anything about it.
I was in like 5th grade when that show.
Yeah, I remember seeing commercials about it.
You get like 7.
Watching like 7 times.
Okay, it
Yeah,
says that I can drag and
same
drop
time
add
frame.
files here. Let's see. I've never done this
That
before.
one just be awesome.
Wow, that is cool.
Will it work?
Will it work?
Ah, it worked.
Yep,
But
it
really
seems to
seem like
work.
it's sorcery.
Yep, this is Ajax at its best. Ajax is the integration of JavaScript, so you can make your screen interactive, and it doesn't have to refresh the entire screen. It can refresh just certain elements of the HTML document. It's a really cool feature. Google Documents for the most part is implemented by Ajax.
Clever stuff.
Hmm?
Clever stuff.
Yep, clever stuff, but it's not accessible in terms of accessibility to the disabled people. You know, it's like the biggest enemy of accessibility. All right, so XYZ is up here. It is implementing your usual linear search, okay, but in a kind of weird way. All right. So are there any questions about this particular sample program? Let me just kind of go back here and see if anyone has any question about this one.
I think you went over it, but if you change like by reference A to by evaluated, it wouldn't even work, right?
It would work, but it will waste a lot of columns. Because if you pass an array by value,
Oh, it would take the whole.
you're copying the entire array into, in this case, you will basically use 3 columns per invocation. So that would just be kind of wasteful. But yes, you can do it with programming languages that support passing arrays by value. It can be done that way. And there are occasions where it makes sense. But in C, you cannot. C does not have the capability of passing arrays by value. So the only thing it can do is to pass it by reference.
So it's basically useless because you can just do it that way, right?
It's not entirely useless because if the invocation itself needs to do some sort of modification to the array that you do not want to pass back to the original array, passing the array by value is not a bad thing. I mean, you're just having a copy of the original, then you can work with it, do whatever processing is necessary. But when you return back to the invoke statement, then the original array is actually not affected because you have been working with a copy of that. And there are occasions where that is actually helpful. All right. So if there are are there any questions about this particular sample program? Because I think it represents a good combination of things that we have talked about already. No questions? Okay. I think it's a good one to really kind of do it again, if you want to. Don't look at my solution, just kind of work on it yourself and see if you can basically work it out the same way as we did in the class. If there are no questions, I'll keep this one up just in case someone, just suddenly, oh, okay, there's a question about it. I just want to ask it. So next class on Tuesday, we'll talk about the practice exams, so I can give you guys an idea of what kind of exams, questions you can expect. You can also click these links. They're all, open. I don't think any one of these is actually hidden. So you can click the link of practice exam 2 for spring 2012. This is an actual exam 2 from last year, so it's not, should change this label, shouldn't I? So people cannot hold me accountable. But you said this is the actual exam this year. No.
Have people actually tried to do that where they thought you posted the exam answers and were mad that you didn't?
No.
Not
No.
yet.
You just made it worse.
2012 fall, not 2013 spring. You just reinforced.
No, this is oh.
Just made it even worse.
Someone just like skipped classes studying at home right now and saw that.
This is probably the fall of 2012. Yep, you're right.
Do you have the solutions to them anywhere? Or?
The solution is not there.
Last time
I
I
must have the
searched-
solution somewhere, but it's not.
Last time I searched YouTube for like a good couple half hours.
Yeah,
A couple of
yeah, they're
background
all on YouTube. I think they should all be on YouTube.
Yeah.
So you can actually go to YouTube and look for that. And that's one good reason why I have to use new questions every semester, because I keep all my archive of YouTube stuff, over the past, I don't remember how many semesters now. There are more than 1,000 clips I have uploaded with that account, so I have no idea how. I think I did that I was doing that since 2010, so you can actually look up at least 3 or 4 semesters.
Yeah.
Yep.
How many subscribers do you have on YouTube?
Not a whole lot, I don't think.
I'm one of them.
Because I know you have how many views? Like either 87 or 67?
Let's see. Since I logged in as me already, how do you find out? My subscriptions? No, that's what I'm subscribing to.
Just type in
They
some
don't
props.
have, like their channel,
Dashboard.
or do they not have a channel anymore?
No, okay, there we go.
There are 35,000 views, 136 subscribers. Where?
That's just the net change in the last.
No, the top, the very top.
Just a net change over
very top.
Very top of the table.
Very, very top.
First line, right
Oh.
inside.
Right underneath that.
Oh, okay. That's not a lot.
For how many videos? Yes, it's not.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
You need to post a video of a cat.
Yeah.
Seriously, post a video of the cat. What-
Cats doing algorithms.
Cats
Oh
doing
my
algorithms.
I'd watch.
That would be kind of interesting. Yep.
I was gonna ask you to look up the algorithm march on YouTube.
Algorithm March.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting video of how an algorithm works using ninjas.
Using what?
Ninjas.
Ninjas.
Yes.
Okay.
This warrants
Relevant to the
investigation.
class. Yeah, it is.
Okay.
You wanna throw a disclaimer out there first?
Yeah.
I have not previously viewed this video.
All right. Well, I'll look it up in my leisure. All right. So we are kind of technically moving on to topic 10 right now. Topic 10 is a topic that is also independent, almost completely independent to everything that we talked about already. It has to do with records, types, and stuff like that. You know, you can actually read the notes here to find out exactly what it is. But before we talk about this, let's talk about types and records in real life. In other words, we're talking about stuff that you actually have to do on a daily basis, maybe on paper, maybe on the computer, that has something to do with types and records. So let's deal with types first, okay? So let's go to a particular form. Okay, let me see if I can think of a online place where we can fill in forms. We can go to Amazon. That's it. That's a place where you can find forms. So I'm not signing in yet. So let's look for something that I can buy. Pencils.
Get the Ticonderoga black ones. Those are the best.
Okay, so I'm gonna add one to my cart, and I go to my cart. Hey, I bought something already.
Oh, you already bought pencils.
There you go.
Interesting.
It just throws that in your cart for you.
All right, so let's go to here, and this is the form, right? Quantity. They're both 1 at this point. So the point of this particular form is I can make adjustments to how many of each thing I want to purchase in the shopping cart. Okay. So the concept of a type is basically, is this value going to work in this context? That's really the question of that's really what types are for, is to say, okay, what kind of a value can I expect at this place? So what if I type, oh, I need 2 cases of these pencils, and type TWO. I couldn't even type it here. But I was trying to type TWO. Why can't I specify 2 of these boxes of pencils?
Because it's a string, it's using letters, and the program that's running doesn't recognize the letters TWO as a number 2.
Exactly. So the digit 2, on the keyboard is a number, but when I spell out 2 as TWO, it is what we call text or string, okay? And the type doesn't match, okay? So that's one application of type already. Using my mouse pad here, I can show you some additional examples, but I think you guys already, kind of getting the idea already. We deal with types all day long, okay? For instance, let's talk about multiplication, okay? What is expected on the left-hand side of a multiplication? A number, right? Something that can be multiplied. Okay? So 54 is a number, that's okay. On the right-hand side, I can have, fractions like that, it's not a problem. Decimal values, not a problem, because it is still a number. Okay, so this makes sense. 54 times 0.25 actually makes sense. It gives me another number. Okay. We have expectations like that with logical operators like disjunction and conjunction. So let's talk about and here. What should go onto this side? Something that is either
True or false?
True or false, okay? Because we're trying to limit what kind of thing can go onto this side. So, the easiest way to give ourselves something that is either true or false is a comparison, right? 3 is less than 4 is, giving us true or false, okay? What about the other side? Pretty much the same thing, right? So I can have 51 equals to 65. Okay. Now it doesn't make any sense, right? 51 equals to 65 doesn't really make any sense. But in this case, it's okay because 51 equals 65 is giving me a true false value. It's false in this case. So the conjunction is going to be evaluating true and false, which is false. Okay. In other words, at least I can proceed and finish this entire operation. The next line is not going to make any sense. Okay. If I just say 54 and true, okay, it doesn't make any sense because 54 is not true or false. It is a number. I cannot use a number in a conjunction. In other words, a type is basically a restriction of what kind of value can appear in a particular context. That's basically what a type is, and that's also how it is used in a programming language. Are we doing okay so far in terms of the understanding of what a type is in the context of programming? Very good. So now we can move on to the concept of a record. Okay. So let me switch back to the notes here. I'll just open this up. And this kind of talks about why do we need records in real life as well as in programming? Well, it's not 100% necessary, but it certainly is a good thing to have. Okay, imagine when was the last time you actually have to fill in a form of some kind, physically?
Yesterday.
Yesterday? What kind of form?
Taxes.
Taxes? Okay. So imagine your tax form. That's a really good example. That's a really good example in our context here. So how many fields did you fill in with your tax form?
I have no idea.
Lots.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So imagine that each question in your tax form is on its own little slip of paper. So you end up with hundreds of these little slips of paper, right?
Yeah.
So imagine you just go get your 1040 form, okay, and then you use a paper cutter. You cut it out so that each number or each field is its own little slip of paper. Okay, so you end up with this little big pile of little paper, right? Okay, so and let's say that you are doing this and somebody else is doing the same thing, and then you ran into each other and you both drop your big pile of little slips of paper. Wouldn't it be kind of hard to figure out which one is yours and which one is the other person's? Yeah. And we do the same thing. We have the same kind of problem with programming. Okay, because up to this point, each variable, not counting arrays, is basically one individual piece of information. Okay. Okay, but that doesn't make any sense because we have arrays. We can organize things into into one bigger unit. Well, but there's one restriction about arrays that makes it kind of not really applicable in general with forms. What is one of the restrictions of an array about its elements?
Same type.
They have to have the same type. And that's why we have to talk about type first. Because now that we understand that every element inside an array must have the same type, that means arrays really cannot save us from this general situation where you have a bunch of information that are related, they really belong together, but you cannot put it into an array. Okay? Because when you look at forms in general, okay, real life forms, you have fields to remember your name, which is text. There are fields where you have to circle your gender, so that's either M or F. Okay? I think sometimes they let you not specify too, but that's really just 3 choices, right? You have potentially they can ask you about your height. Okay, so those are numbers. Potentially you have social security number. So that has to be in the particular format. So all of these things have special restrictions. So you cannot use an array to specify everything. Is that okay so far? So that's why we cannot just use arrays to store everything. We need what we call records. So basically a record is a form that you can use to basically put all related information into one single unit. Are we doing okay so far in terms of the concept of a form or record in programming? Okay. When you move on to C and C++ programming, they call this struct or structure. When you move on to object-oriented programming, they call this a class. So class, struct, record, they're all basically referring to the same thing, same basic concept. Okay. Well, let's start with a particular example. And so this is the definition of a record. Every record has to have a name. So we'll just do one simple example first to illustrate one particular concept, and then we'll make it more fancy with other stuff. So we'll just specify a record. Let's say this is a date. Okay. So in order to represent the date, we have the year, which is an integer. We have month, which in this representation is an integer as well. And then we have the date of month, which is also an integer, and record. And now, right away, we have our main subroutine, define submain. And then we'll just have today, local. Okay, so we're combining all the concepts that we have learned so far. So we have a local variable called today, and today has a type of date. And then we'll have today's year is 2013, today's month. And I'll count month from 1, instead of 0, just so that it's more intuitive. So today will be April, which is 4th. And we also have the day of month, which is 11. And sub, evoke sub, evoke main. The only purpose of this program is to illustrate the concept of records. So it doesn't really serve any real purpose. All right, so next we will take a look at the trace of this program. And as we look at the trace, we'll start to talk about concepts in this particular program. Let's go ahead and save it first. Here's the trace of the program. We don't really need any comments, so we can start with line number. There are no conditions to evaluate. So the precondition has nothing to say because we do not have any global variables. We start execution on line 12. It is invoking main, so I have to return where to go back to, and that's going to be post. So that's pretty standard stuff, now that we have talked about this for some time already. By the way, we also need to allocate columns for local variables inside main. There's only one. Okay, the one local variable is called what? Today. So today is the name of the variable. Date is the type of the variable. So we are just using, this syntax is borrowed from Pascal. In C and C++, it would have been called date today, because in C and C++, you name the type first, and then you name the name of the variable. But I'm borrowing this syntax from Pascal, so we specify the name of the variable, and then we specify the type of it. But today is going to take up multiple columns. It's not a single thing anymore, because when you look at the type of today, it is of type date. But when you look up the definition of the type date, it has 3 components. Each one is an integer. So that means today as a local variable also have these components, which is year, month, month, and day of month.
So it's like an array.
Sorry?
So it's like an array.
It is a composite, but it is not the same type of composite as an array. An array as a composite, each individual component is named by an index, which is a number. And as a record, today is a composite, but each individual component is named by is identified by a name, but not a number. It's not an index. So that makes certain things impossible. You cannot use a loop to index through all the items inside an array, inside a record, like you could do with an array.
A record's composed of strings, like instead of
Sorry, say again?
So like for instance, it's a string. It's not. To text is a string, so it's not a. Like a
But it's not. You cannot do it at runtime. You cannot just say list all the members of a particular record. Not in C and C++. In some other languages, yes, you can, but not in C and C++. Yep.
You said it's a class or a record today's?
No, that's not today. It is date. Okay, so let's look at this screen right now because it's already kind of clear. Something is missing here. I don't see the word date anywhere on the trace itself. We see today as a variable, but we do not see date as a type represented anywhere in the trace. Why is that? Date is a template. Okay, it's kind of like an empty form, that you make more copies of when you need to give someone a form to fill in. That's the original. That's the template. Yep.
So date is the parent and date is the child?
No, no. That's not how you look at it either. The best analogy I can think of is that date is the name of a cookie cutter, and then today as a local variable is a cookie that you cut out using that particular cookie cutter. Okay. Now, when you execute a program, it's all about making the dough, using existing dough to make cookies and eat cookies and then make some more cookies. Okay.
I like this train of thought.
Yes, me too about this time too. So date is a cookie cutter, and today is a cookie cut out using that cookie cutter. Now it's a really good analogy because if you use date as a type, every single thing that is of type date is going to have the same look. They will all, each one will have a year, each one will have a month, each one will have a day of month. Okay, they have the same general structure, but the value of each one can be different. In other words, using the same cookie cutter, you can cut out chocolate chip cookie, you can cut out oatmeal cookie, you can cut out different types of cookie. But once you cut out a cookie, you can also eat it differently too, right? Okay, so it's the same thing here. Each cookie that you cut out becomes independent to all the other cookies. The only link they have is they all have the general shape and the general structure, the same general structure. And that's why you do not see date represented in the trace itself, because it is just a cookie cutter. It's not useful in the execution of the program. Yep.
So anytime you specify a variable and you use a colon and then reference a type of record and the record's defined, then that means that particular variable uses that record as basically its shape.
Yes, exactly. It has the template. Okay. So right here, there are several concepts that we really should talk about. Date is the name of the record, and today is the name of a local variable of type date. Okay, so that's how you relate those things. In terms of object-oriented programming, date is the name of a class, and today is the name of an object of that class. Yep.
So this is like the types that we normally been using is like integer, boolean, and string. Those are the three types we know. And then this records are allowing us to specify
a user-defined type, basically. Yep.
Okay.
That's exactly what it is. Okay. So after this, after we allocate all the columns that we need, we go into the subroutine. So now we go into the subroutine. The first line is line 8. So line 8 says, we want to modify the year. When you talk about one component inside the record, it is, it depends on, what type of terminology you want to deal with. In terms of object-oriented programming, each component inside a class or an object is called a member. Okay, so year is a member of date, month is a member of date, and day of month is also a member of date. Okay, that's the modern terminology. When you talk about it as a record, which is an older way of looking at things, each one can also be called a field. Okay, so a field is called a year, a field is called a month, another field is called a DOM, day of month, inside a date record. Yep.
And then today is just like
And then today is the name of a variable of type or class, if you use the object-oriented way, date. So that's how you kind of relate all of these terms together. So the dot symbol here, when you look at this dot here between today and year, this dot is kind of taking the place of the apostrophe S in English language. So it's basically saying today's year is 2013, today's month is 4 April, and today's day of month is the 11th. So it's basically the apostrophe S. Okay. So do we have any questions about line 8? So line 8 is just you're going to modify column C, so it becomes 2013. Line 9 is going to modify the month field and update it to 4. And then line 10 changes DOM to 11. And then we get to the end of the subroutine, and which does exactly the same thing as it always does, is to look up the return line number first. So we figure out where we are going to continue execution. And then we deallocate everything that we allocated for this invocation. So both of all 4 columns will be deallocated in this case. Are there any questions about this trace? I think the trace is really helpful in terms of differentiating the concepts of which one is the name of the class or the cookie cutter, and which one is the name of a cookie cut out using that cookie cutter. Yep.
So how would we get it in display? How would we get it to print out?
Then you need a print statement to print, but when you print
today.
No, the system does not natively understand, or in C, it does not natively understand how to print out an entire structure. So you can only print out individual members when the member is down to one of the types that you can print. So in C and C++, it's either a string, a number. Yeah, that's basically the only 2 things that can natively be printed. So when you have a record like this, you have to basically specify first, I want to print the year, then I want to print the month, then I want to print the day of month. Are there any questions about this trace? Is everybody clear about what date is, what today is, and how they relate?
Within record date, you have the say day each string not computer correct because it is a record. Have it print.
Yes, you can. Yep. Because it's a record, each member can have a different type. Or members do not have to have the same type, and that's a better way to put it.
Yeah, just in this example, we chose integer just for whatever.
Right. Because for processing, most of the time we use integers, just because it's it's close enough to like 4 is close enough to April, and it's easier to process and store as well.
So you said C refers to a record as a structure.
Mm-hmm.
What does it refer to members as? Still members?
I do not know for sure. Let me just look it up. So we are looking at the structure is also called struct. Okay, for some reason they don't spell out the entire thing, so just call it struct. So when you look this the fields. So a struct is kind of like a record. It still refers to each smaller component as a field. In C++, in object-oriented programming, it's called a member. Yep. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Is it too late to ask for the roll sheet?
It's not too late because we still officially got 2 minutes, so you just have to do this real fast. And well, since we are going to wait for the roll sheet to pass around, are there any other questions about what we just talked about?
There never seems to be any questions about triangular.
There are no questions, right? Well, the way we're going right now, we may be able to touch on some object-oriented programming concepts, which I think would be good. It's not going to be something I'll be testing in this class, so the final exam is not going to have anything more than what I have already posted online at this point. But object-oriented programming is a very useful concept. No, C++. But I will just be talking about object-oriented programming in general. and what a class is, and why classes are useful because of inheritance.
So C++ is object-oriented.
Yes, C++ is object-oriented, but it's also backward compatible with C. So everything that's bad about C is also carried on in C++ too.
Do you teach 360?
No, I do not. There are two professors teaching C++. One is Iraj Subsidiary, and then the other one is Damon Antles. Is the fall schedule out yet?
Yeah, I heard it was.
Okay.
The course policy is available.
Well, since the Roshi is being passed, I'm just gonna take a look at the.
Schedule of classes?
Yep. I just had this discussion with another professor earlier this morning, and we were talking about who really should be doing the job of a counselor. And the answer is, well, it depends on which part of it. I mean, if it's just talking about the scheduling and stuff like that, yes, you need to meet with your counselor. But if it's talking about which course to take next, I think there. All right, so this is cisp300 for the fall semester. So the one section is taught by Iraj Subsidiary, and then the other one is taught by Damon Antles. So we have one, I think both of these are hybrid classes because they only have one component, face-to-face. So one has a evening face-to-face component and the other one has a morning face-to-face component. And only the lab is face-to-face. The lecture portion is online, which means you have to read the reading material basically by yourself.
They started doing a lot. A lot of classes.
Yeah, they're doing this a lot. I think it has to do with the
There's one
allocation of
class.
space.
There's one class that's that's both, or that's just all one class.
Even this one here?
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, but this one means they have both components partially online and partially face to face. Because you see that there's also a TBA portion of the lecture. So it's basically a hybrid approach. It's I cannot really teach courses online or hybrid
I
courses.
was gonna take an online class, but I just wouldn't be motivated to do it. That's why.
Because you like to.
I think it's easier if I'm in the classroom. I can tell whether people are getting the concept or not a little bit better. There's more interaction which I think is better for teaching and learning purposes. But both of these are basically hybrid classes.
Do you know Professor Michael Dixon at Tech City by any chance?
Michael Dixon.
Yeah.
I do not know him in person.
Okay.
You might want to ask students who have taken his classes before.
Well, I've looked around and for the summer course. Apparently he teaches heavily on C and doesn't really trust C++. And also, it seems like he is kind of wishy-washy on what he wants to do, and he'll tell you to do something and switch. But I was trying to get a summer course.
Right, so
And
that
he's
you
looking
can
at-
save one semester, right?
Yeah. So it's I was looking at it.
Do they sell cookies at the bookstore?
I have some students
They
in my
do
CISP
the
intern class who
light of the-
took CISP 360 from Dixon. So if you want to, I can relay
If you would be willing, that would be great.
Stop the recording.
It's, it's either that or a 4-day-a-week chem class down in Sac City as well. So it's we'll see what I can do.
I think the consensus was that he is kind of rigid, and his class covers a lot of material, but not. Let me ask my 310 students, whether they felt prepared for classes that rely on C and C++. I think that's the bottom line.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Quick question.
Yep.
The router at my house just sort of went down, and I was wondering if you had any suggestions